What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Avengers Age of Ultron. So it's finally time to talk about Avengers Age of Ultron, continuing on my very slowly moving MCU series. And a big reason for why I kind of slowed down when it comes to making these videos is just, the MCU has just been covered on so many levels on YouTube. Not only have people just covered it in general, but a lot of times people will do kind of like recovering the whole franchise when a new installment comes out. So I just feel like the MCU is just so oversaturated on YouTube, and these videos almost never do very well on my channel. But we're here to talk about Avengers Age of Ultron this time around, and I'm very happy to be once again joined here in this video by my buddy Alex Madden. It's been quite some time, I think, since we did Maleficent together, since I've had him here on the channel. And yeah, I'm very happy to have him here once again. So we're going to be hearing from him in just a little bit, but let's go ahead and get into my thoughts on the second Avengers film. A film that, quite frankly, I think gets way more hate than it actually deserves. Now, without a doubt, this is my least favorite of the 4 Avengers films that we've gotten so far, but I feel like that's kind of a given when the first one was this groundbreaking film in comic book genre and just the cinema in general, just film, movie going in general. It was just a big moment when it comes to movies. And beyond that, you also have Infinity War and Endgame being this awesome culmination of 10 years of storytelling, where those are essentially a 2-part huge story. And with something like Infinity War and Endgame, or going back to the original, it's just no way that there was going to be able to top that original and the epicness of that climax of the others with a film like Age of Ultron. But I'm never, ever going to understand all the hate that this film gets. Now, with that said, there are elements about this film that I definitely have criticisms on, and a lot of that has to do with how jam-packed the story is. The film is completely and utterly littered with tons and tons of setup for things that wouldn't go on to be actually kind of, paid off until way later. There are things that have just now been paid off as recent as things like WandaVision that were set up in this film. There are things that they call back to that, at a lot of times, I think a lot of people just may have forgotten about. Things that you almost didn't really think were ever going to get paid off are now getting paid off in things like WandaVision or things like Thor Ragnarok that would come years after this film actually came out. So I do understand a lot of the criticisms in terms of just having this film be very jam-packed and kind of not having the most coherent story. With that said, I think this movie, though, is just tons of fun. As a kid, I would have screamed and cried for a movie like this to exist. I would have died to have an Avengers film of any kind. And I remember going to see the first one, and I was absolutely, completely just jaw-dropped in love with it. And going into this one, I was completely and utterly stoked, and I loved the film. I saw it multiple times in theaters, and I've seen it multiple times since at home, showing it to other people, or just on my various MCU rewatches. There's some of the coolest action in this film. There are so many things and story threads that are set up in this film that would go on to be paid off in really beautiful and great ways in future installments into the MCU. And sometimes when I hear people really crap on this movie, even though I can agree that it is the weakest of the Avengers films, at least to me it is, and I know a lot of other people also feel that way, I think in no way, shape, or form is this a bad film, and in no way, shape, or form is this anywhere near the bottom or even mid-tier MCU. I think this is a big, over-the-top, big comic book movie that really shows us our characters all together, doing things that we've always wanted to see them do in live action. I love that this movie opens up with our characters all together. We're getting to see the Avengers kick ass from the second this movie starts, leading up to that epic shot of all of them just kind of lined up there, like a perfect comic book shot of them all just, getting ready to kick ass out there in the snow as they're trying to get their hands on the power of the Tesseract that has now been put into a spear. Once they actually get in there and they get their hands on this spear that has, the power of an Infinity Stone in it, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner end up making the very poor decision to try and create artificial intelligence with this alien technology that they now have their hands on, and this ends up creating Ultron, played by James Spader, in a beautiful way. When I first heard that James Spader was cast as Ultron, it was definitely not the voice that I was ever expecting to ever hear from Ultron, based on some of the video games that we had seen him be in, some of the animated stuff, and just if you look at the comic book panels that he's in sometimes, the last thing you think is James Spader's voice and the sarcastic kind of vibe that they gave his character. But ultimately, I loved it. I thought James Spader did a great job, and even though Ultron is a villain that ultimately in the grand scheme of the MCU is kind of just another character that's, set up and defeated at the end of the movie. I think that he's a character that he could easily bring back, and one of my favorites in the entirety of the MCU. I love the menacing feel that he has in a lot of these scenes. I really enjoy the questions that he brings up for the Avengers, the things that they kind of have to battle. And overall, I just think that he's a really cool looking and feeling villain, and compared to a lot of the other more forgettable villains in the MCU, he's definitely one that stands out to me. Beyond that, this film is just, again, jam-packed with action, tons of little great character moments, and I love what it does, again, for the setup of things that would go on to be paid off in a really beautiful way. You also have characters that are set up in this film for the very first time that are introduced to audiences that are just fucking awesome. You have Elizabeth Olsen playing Wanda Maximoff, who obviously has now just finally taken on the title of Scarlet Witch with WandaVision. You have Aaron Taylor Johnson in here as Quicksilver, and even though his presence is felt throughout the course of the series, we do know he obviously dies at the end of this film. But you also have Paul Bettany jumping from playing the character of Jarvis from the Iron Man movies into being the Vision. He's finally Vision in this movie, and it's just awesome. I remember seeing that movie in theaters and just being completely stoked that we were finally genuinely getting Vision in live action. I just couldn't believe that we were at a point where these characters that I, longtime comic book fans, people like myself, read on the comic book pages and saw in the cartoons, and most, casual goers didn't know who these are. But to be able to see characters like him grace the screen now is just like, is this really happening? I can't believe that we're in a time where Vision is on in a movie. He's on the big screen. He's here. I'm all over the place right now, but I just remember being so excited, and I just still am. It's still super awesome to see everything that the MCU has accomplished. So yeah, Paul Bettany as Vision, love it. Love the way he's introduced in this film. Again, same with Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda. We also learn in this film that Hawkeye has a family. He has some kids, and he has his wife, played by Linda Cardellini. And yeah, she would go on obviously to be a returning character in the franchise, and definitely something that holds a lot of stakes and weight for the character of Hawkeye moving forward. But yeah, really, really cool to be able to learn more about one of our Avengers in this film, a character like Hawkeye who didn't really have a whole lot of characterization in the MCU, and being able to kind of get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain in terms of his character, I thought was great. And then another character that would go on to be a bigger part of the MCU to at least some extent is Andy Serkis's character, Ulysses Klaue, who is a big character in the comic book, specifically when it comes to Black Panther, and he would go on to be one of the main adversaries in the Black Panther movie, even though he eventually ends up dying. But I love Andy Serkis, and so I really enjoy the role he plays in this film, though it is very small. Now, I have so much more to say about this movie, as you can tell. It gets me incredibly excited, and I love the MCU. I love Marvel. These are characters and storylines that I've loved since I was a kid, watching the cartoons that I grew up watching from the late 60s, early 70s, the 80s, all the stuff that my parents grew up on that I was now, kind of making part of my DNA as I was growing up, and then all the stuff that was coming out when I was a kid, and then reading the comics, and then playing the video games. Like, to now be in a time where we have films like this that we can go back and revisit, and then hear people talk crap about it, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I genuinely full-on love this movie, and I have more to say, but before we get to the rest of that, let's go ahead and hear what Alex Madden had to say about this.
Hey, what's up guys? Alex back here on Anthony's channel. I'd like to say thank you to Anthony for bringing me back to talk about Avengers, because I'm a big MCU fan. There's not a single MCU film I dislike. There are some that I borderline think are a little bit weaker than many others, mostly Black Widow, Thor, The Dark World, Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, but I don't even hate those movies. I still think that they're watchable and there's always a saving grace about them, but there's one movie in recent years that seems to have gotten under a lot of people's skin, and that is Avengers Age of Ultron. I think this is one of the most underrated entries in the MCU. There are some negatives I do have with the movie, and I guess I'll start with those first, and that is it does have that been there, done that type of feel. Oh, hey, we've seen this before. We've seen this team all together. Like, how can you make this better than the first one? And I don't think that this movie was ever going to be better than the first one. It does suffer from a bit of sequelitis, where it does try and go a bit bigger. There's a lot more happening in this movie, and the movie thinks that that is better, unfortunately. And it's not necessarily better. Sure, there are some better sequences in here than the first one. Like Hulk vs. Hulkbuster is a great sequence. I've always loved the sequence too, where the Avengers are in Korea and they have to keep the body away from Ultron so that he doesn't upload himself to the body of what they were going to use for Vision. That sequence is really great. I think the action sequences in this movie are a lot better. It's just, It's a very familiar movie. It's a been there, done that type of movie, and when you actually think about it, it has the same basic narrative structure as the first one. The movie also suffers from a little bit of too much setup, especially with Thor and Ragnarok and that whole thing. What's to come later on in the MCU, as we find out, you know, it sets up that Captain America is actually worthy of wielding Thor's hammer, sets up some stuff with the Infinity Stones, and I think that that does hinder this movie's progress towards the final act of the movie. I think it brings some of the story elements to a stall, and Quicksilver is probably the thing that people hate the most in this movie, and I gotta agree with them. If you're gonna bring Quicksilver into this movie, why kill him? But the rest of the movie is a lot of fun. I like the idea that Wanda actually goes from villain to hero. I thought that that was really well realized. Ultron is underrated as a villain. A lot of people don't like Ultron. They say he's too sarcastic in this film. I think that that's the whole point. He's supposed to be like that. You're also supposed to disagree and hate Ultron, but at the same time, you understand where he's coming from. So the motivations have always been clear for me for where Ultron is coming from and why he's trying to carry out this plan. And James Spader does a very good job as Ultron. As I said, I think the action scenes in here do top the previous Avengers film. The previous Avengers film was a lot of fun. I think the action takes it a step further in this film, and it's actually done a bit better in my opinion, despite the fact that we go from aliens to a robot army. That adds to a bit of the familiarity, but I think it adds for a little bit more fun too, because would you rather see aliens or robots? I mean, I know it's kind of a downgrade, but I think I would rather see robots. A lot of humor in here works, especially when it comes to Thor. This is where Thor was starting to really come into his own in terms of how Thor starts to get characterized later on in the MCU, like Ragnarok, Infinity War. I think his time on Earth really reshaped Thor and how he became accustomed to culture on Earth. And so starting to crack jokes became Thor's way of fitting in, and I like that idea. The humor is well realized, the action's really fun. It's just a fun all-around movie that I don't think gets enough credit. It probably gets less credit now because of all the Joss Whedon stuff. And while this is the weakest of the 4 Avengers films, it's by no means a bad film. I still always enjoy watching Age of Ultron. I still think it's a really fun film, despite some numerous problems that I have. I think it's safe to say that obviously we're going to have some problems with movies like this, but that doesn't make the movie bad. And I think sometimes we get into that mindset. So thank you once again to Anthony for having me on. Before I go, I do want to give a grade to Age of Ultron. I'm going to say I will give it a B+. Hope to see you all soon. Hope to come back very soon. Hope to get Anthony onto my channel. I will have Anthony leave my link to my website in the description below. You guys are the best. Thank you for watching both my channel and his channel. I'll see you at the movies somewhere.
A big thanks to my buddy Alex for being here in this video. As usual, guys, you can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love. Let him know I sent you. But for now, let's go ahead and get into my final thoughts on Avengers Age of Ultron. Like I said, easily my least favorite of the Avengers films, but still a film I love with so much of my heart. I have such a great time watching this film every time. I love the score, too. That's one thing I hadn't talked about in the early part of the review, and let's get into that. The score in this film is composed by Danny Elfman and Brian Taylor, and man, just absolutely love the score in this film. Again, that Avengers theme being reprised in this film from the original, top notch. I love the Avengers theme. I remember when it was first introduced just thinking this is so cool, and now all these years later and having all these Avengers films, especially when you hear it in things like Infinity War and Endgame, and just kind of seeing where we've kind of, you know, gotten with this whole franchise, it's just amazing. It puts a smile on my face every single time, and it's a theme that puts chills into my body, puts chills into my soul every time that I watch these movies, and yeah, this one is no different. This is also the last film in the MCU directed by Joss Whedon, and I thought Joss Whedon did a phenomenal job with the first one and with this one, and you know, he's come out pretty much saying that, you know, this was a nightmare process for him. He was pretty much given so much to kind of have on his shoulders, so much weight on his shoulders in terms of setting up, again, things that would not go on to be, you know, paid off until, you know, things that are just now coming out like WandaVision, or things that came out in the last few years like Thor Ragnarok. You know, there's so much that was set up in this film for the future, so many characters that are introduced while also trying to introduce and defeat a villain that also has to kind of tell a story and kind of push this team forward, all these characters that we already know and love. And again, I haven't mentioned it, but Come on, Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson, Mark Ruffalo. I mean, the cast is just top notch. Everybody is phenomenal in this film. I talked about some of the new people, but yeah, as far as the returning characters and all the returning actors, phenomenal. And so, look, Joss Whedon, we've heard a lot about him in the last couple years, especially when it comes to Justice League and some of the on-set kind of abuse that he seems to have been shelling out. I don't condone his actions and those things that are apparently coming out about him, but I got to give credit where credit is due, and I think that he did a great job with both the first Avengers and this one. And, I remember back then thinking, oh, it's a damn shame that he felt so overwhelmed with this film. But, really thinking about it, I can understand why. This was a huge task. And one other thing that I forgot to mention that was just so epic about this film is we finally get to see Iron Man's Hulkbuster outfit come out as he gets to fight Hulk. We get this epic action sequence between the Hulk and Iron Man in his Hulkbuster suit. And again, just going back to being a kid and reading comic books and seeing this imagery that I never thought I'd ever see in a high budget live action comic book movie. Just amazing. And ultimately, this is a fun, awesome installment into the MCU for me. Is it jam-packed and filled with a lot of things that are trying to set up for future installments? Sure. Does that sometimes muddle the story a little bit? Sure. But I think the action is epic. I think the performances are phenomenal. I think the movie in and of itself is just a great fun time. I never get bored watching it. And that's my thoughts on Avengers Age of Ultron. So I very much look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Did you like this movie? Do you not like this movie? Where does this rank for you in terms of the MCU or the Avengers films? I know in terms of the MCU, that's a lot, so no need to answer that one if you don't want to. But where does it rank for you when it comes to the Avengers films? Maybe you like this one more than a lot of other people like myself, or maybe you hate this movie. But either way, I definitely want to hear any of your honest opinions down below in the description box or in the comment section. I've been saying that lately. I've been making that mistake. Even when I cut it out, for some reason I say, leave your comments in the description box. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway, but down in the description box, you can find the link to my buddy Alex Madden. Go give him some love. Let him know I sent you. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up my thoughts on this movie. A big thanks to you guys for watching. Please hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, comment your thoughts, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.